You're locked on to Scotty G and the coach, Tim Lacombe.
Now I know y'all are tripping.
Presented by Mountain Land Supply on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back into Scotty G and the coach here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Alex Napoles, Jake Hatch sitting in for Scotty and the coach. Again, it was a big day yesterday in the NHL, not just for the Utah Mammoth, but a bunch of players that have moved on and a bunch of teams making moves. We'll get some of Cole Bagley's ideas here coming up in just a moment. Expected to join us here in just a bit about what the Mammoth's doing, about what's going on in the NHL, because there are a lot of big moves to also be had. You know, similar to what we were talking about the NBA. Obviously, the NBA, everyone's got an eye on the NBA, but now here, as we welcome in the Utah Mammoth and as we get accustomed to the NHL, we also have to keep an eye on some of these moves happening in the NHL. Jake Hatch.
Well, something that DJ and PK kind of pointed out this morning is like, it's kind of cool to have a second franchise here in the market, and their seasons do overlap. Obviously, they run through the winter and on into the spring, but then they have very similar drafts, free agency, and whatnot. But it gives us extra stuff to pay attention to, and it obviously the rise of the Mammoth rep in the NHL has been something to behold. Ryan and Ashley Smith have done an incredible job about taking a franchise that I have friends who live down in Arizona who said that the Coyotes were a laughingstock of the NHL, and a lot of that went to the ownership and the nickel and dime nature of that ownership group and everything. But Ryan and Ashley Smith, they brought this franchise to Utah. They've loved it up. They've given them top of the line resources, top of the line facilities, and they've been rewarded for it. The Trocheck thing, I don't know if you saw it yesterday. Last year, he had one of those, it wasn't a fold, no trade clause, but Utah was on his list of teams that he would not accept a trade to. He had put that on the list. This year, he took Utah off that list. That allowed them to get this deal done. Shows you that Salt Lake City, shows you that Utah, the word's getting out about what the Mammoth are. And I grew up in an era where the whole Ron Harper was saying, "You go live in Utah." That was like it's like this. It's like knife wound that we still hold as Utahns about Utah and like the fact that no NBA free agents want to come here. Well, guess what? NHL free agents do, and the Utah Mammoth benefit from it.
Absolutely, and there's now moves to be made because of it. I saw a tweet yesterday that was essentially saying that the testament of what Ryan Smith and Ashley Smith have done for the NHL and the Utah market specifically, the fact that you have players now who were initially didn't want to come to Utah, didn't want to, had Utah on their no trade list, and now all of a sudden moves are to be made to bring in some of those guys. Yeah,
and it's a really fun time to watch. Just the way that things are trending here, and it's fun. It really is exciting to watch a franchise that we're going to talk with a guy who covered them as close as anybody. I'm going to restate that point. If there's somebody that covers the Mammoth better and closer than our good friend Cole Bagley does, I'd like to meet them.
Absolutely. Joining us now here on Scotty G and the Coach, it is the Utah Mammoth insider for KSL Sports, Cole Bagley. Cole, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Just trying to keep up with everything that's happening in the AHL, trying to keep up with everything that's happening with the Utah Mammoth. Obviously, the Utah Mammoth yesterday, very, very active. And, of course, bringing in Vincent Trocheck. There was a trade that was made, and then, of course, you have Anders Lee, who was picked up. Just your initial thoughts and your initial reactions to some of the moves that the Utah Mammoth has made so far this offseason.
Yeah, I thought, for the most part, I think they've done really well this offseason, not just in terms of the draft or some of, the Paterka trade and what have you, but I thought they did well yesterday in free agency. In terms of the contracts that they had coming off the books, the Ian Coles and the Kerfoots and the Vanaceks, I think it was the right thing to do to let those guys walk and go and find, other suitors. And then in terms of who they were able to bring in between Trocheck and Anders Lee and trading for Trocheck, I think home runs. To me, those moves illustrate and demonstrate how serious this organization is about continuing to get better every single season, about not just settling for the status quo. And Bill Armstrong and Chris Armstrong have talked a lot recently about, how difficult it is to get back to the playoffs. Just because they're a playoff team last year doesn't mean anything about this upcoming season. Of the 16 teams that made it 2 years ago, only 10 of them returned this previous year. And so for Utah, they understand that they still have a lot of work ahead of them. It's about, I think, slow and steady progress, I think, is what is eventually going to help them win the race. And for me, I think that that's what they're able to accomplish over the last week or so.
All right, Cole, let's dig into the Trocheck deal here because it is a trade, and you give us some assets. You give up a top 4 D-man in Sean Durzi. You give up one of your prized prospects in Cole Bagley. Give me a sense. Do you feel like it was fair value to get him here to Utah in exchange for what you gave up?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty even trade, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, I think it'll take time to really decide a winner, but right off the bat, for the Rangers, I think it helped them accomplish and fulfill some of their needs, right? They didn't have a very deep prospect pool, and they're able to get a really good prospect in Cole Bagley. They need some help defensively, so they're able to get Sean Durzi and then a 3rd-round pick. So for them, I'd say that, if you're going to grade that trade for the Rangers, I'd probably say B+, A-. And then for Utah on the other end, it's the hardest part of that trade was to give up Cole Bagley. I've seen him progress over the last couple of years. He had a really good season in Major Junior for the Barrie Colts. He was one of their leading scorers. He was their captain. Watching him at Dev Camp this week, you could see, his intensity level raise and his, intentions to try and push for an NHL roster spot. That's tough. But with that being said, I would say that Cole was probably their 4th best prospect. I'd probably go with, Tej or Denoyer or 1 and 2. And then Ethan Belches, I'd probably put at 3 and Cole Bagley just right behind him. So for Utah, they have an embarrassment of riches. At some point, they had to start moving on from some of these prospects. And if you're able to get a reigning gold medalist from Team USA, a guy that was super important during, the majority of that tournament. Yes, he played on the 4th line, but he was a specialist. He was one of the primary reasons that the United States was so good on the penalty kill. And he won a lot of important faceoffs for that team. And, he's experienced. Sure, he's up there in age. I think he's going to be turning 33 here shortly. But I think anytime you can get a winner, a guy who knows what it takes to be successful, and a guy that goes to the net and is absolutely just relentless and ferocious, that's a big part of why Utah brought this guy in. They talked, Bill and Chris talked to us yesterday about that, as they reviewed the roster and they looked at the potential needs, that was a big deal for them, was to get, straight line players who are going to go to the net, not be afraid to go to the net. And so that's why they brought in not only Trocheck, but Anders Lee. So for Utah, I think, if you're going to grade that trade, I probably would give Utah a B+. Yes, it's hard to give up a guy like Cole Bagley. I think giving up Sean Durzi, he dropped to the 3rd line. He was a part of the 3rd pair to wrap up the season. I really don't think that you're missing out by letting a guy like that go. Yeah, it sets you back a little bit in terms of your depth and defensively, but Utah's got a couple of guys coming up through the AHL, Simashev and Lambro, who are going to push for a spot. So I think at the end of the day, they'll be okay, and the trade-off is definitely worth it.
Take a look now at Anders Lee, who signs for 3 years, $5.4 million. What do you anticipate to see from Anders Lee? What does Anders Lee bring you on the ice, and what does he bring to this Utah Mammoth team?
Yeah, he brings some things that they've been missing. He brings a lot of size, first and foremost. 6'3" wing, who, again, another menace around the net, another guy that's going to be a big body, who's going to go into near the net front, who's going to block the vision of the goaltender, who's going to use his body, who's going to clean up and score dirty goals. And I think one of the most important things with both of these additions is, where did Utah lack in the playoffs? Well, they lacked physicality. They lacked size. They had a tough time keeping up with the Vegas Golden Knights, who just overwhelmed them. And it made it tough for Utah to generate offense. But you bring in 2 guys like this who, their bread and butter are those dirty goals, are creating in close near the slot in front of the goaltender. That's going to help bridge the gap to not only getting back to the playoffs, but hopefully winning a 1st-round series. And I think that's likely the goal. And with Anders Lee too, I mean, this is just an incredible human being. He's been the captain of the New York Islanders for a long time. He's played so many seasons there. And so not only are you getting a good seasoned veteran player who's going to help fulfill some of the needs, but he's also definitely a really good leader as well.
The one thing I like about Lee, and you kind of mentioned it there, Cole, so if you already kind of answered, I understand, but you talk about the size of the Vegas Golden Knights, and trust me, it was noticeable when you got on the ice between the Mammoth and the Golden Knights, just how big overall VGK were over the Mammoth. A guy like Lee, he brings some of that size that at minimum he can counter that.
100%. And that was when we asked Bill yesterday about why were these two guys, who, by the way, these were two of their most highly coveted free agent and trade prospects. These were the top two of the top guys on their list that they wanted to bring in. They didn't think that Anders Lee was going to be available. They didn't anticipate that he was going to be available and that he would choose Utah over some other suitors. There was some reports yesterday that he picked Utah over the Minnesota Wild, which that just that goes to show
that's massive.
That goes to show you what's being built in Utah, right? I mean, Minnesota is arguably, I'd probably peg them at a dark horse cup contender right now. I mean, just based on what they did last year, they couldn't get past the Colorado Avalanche. I think it was a 4-1 series. They struggled. They've got some things that they've got to figure out. But the fact that he was willing to pick Utah over some other suitors just kind of goes to show what's being built here. What the belief in this organization, in this system is, and how much of an impact he feels that he can have. And yeah, it's like I said. I mean, I think that Utah greatly lacked playoff type players. And that's something that even Coach Torney talked to us about a week ago when I asked him, hey, what did this playoff series teach you about what you need as both a coach and in terms of the team in order to find more success, a year from now, next spring and summer. And he said, look, one of the biggest things that we've looked at is, which of the players on our roster from last year were just 82 game players, and which players can we go out and get who can not only be 82 game players, but can be postseason players. And to me, I think that Trocheck and Lee are both guys that you look at and go, okay, those guys are going to show up for all 82, and then they're going to make a difference when it comes to the postseason.
We talk about some of the outs, and we hit on the prospect Cole a little bit, but out of Ian Cole, Alex Kerfoot, Vanacek, Jersey, some of the guys that have moved on, is there anybody that you think, anybody that stands out to you that the Mammoth should have considered to keep in here to try to push this team into the next, or are they all good moves of hey, maybe it was time to move on and upgrade at those positions?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was just talking about of which of these players on last year's roster were just 82 game players.
Mm-hmm.
I'd argue that pretty much every single one that's been moved was mostly just an 82 game player. Ian Cole is a very successful defenseman. He's won 2 Stanley Cups, but he's also going to be 38 years old. That's tough. He did a lot for this team. He did a lot for not only, I think, mentoring a lot of these younger defensemen, younger players. He was great in terms of media. He would always tell it like it is. Most of the times that Utah lost, we'd actually usually request Ian Cole because he would just say it like it is. But it was definitely time to move on, and good for him to go and find a pretty decent size contract in Chicago. Alexander Kerfoot, he was definitely a good player. He was kind of regarded as a Swiss Army knife in some regards. He could do a lot. He could play on the wing. He could play at center. He could facilitate. He could score. But again, he had some injuries over these first 2 seasons in Utah. He wasn't always available, and then just wasn't that effective in the postseason.
Yeah.
Then you look at a guy like Sean Dursey. I really like Sean, great human being. But there's a reason that he went from the top pairing and dropped all the way down to the third. He just wasn't as reliable. And I think one of his biggest struggles was he likes to be a puck moving defenseman, and you need those types of guys on your team. But he would get punished for, overcommitting by pinching it, at times when he shouldn't have. And, that created some issues. And, like I said before, I don't know that he's necessarily a guy that you're going to miss a whole lot. Great human being, like I said, an ambassador for the Utah Hockey Club, for the Utah Mammoth. But, I like that Utah, looked at their roster and said, okay, there's guys that we can definitely move on from here and we can upgrade. And I think that they accomplished that. And even bringing back a guy like Kevin Stenlund, I think that he's a specialist. He's a guy that's going to win a lot of faceoffs for you, who's going to bolster your fourth line, and then who can also help on the penalty kill. I mean, the fact that you're going to have 2 of the best faceoff specialists in Kevin Stenlund and Vincent Trocheck on your team, those guys are also penalty killers. That just goes to show, again, like I said before, Utah is serious about taking the next step here.
All right, Cole. So when we were getting ready for NHL free agency, The top 50 list of the top free agents came out, and I think across the board, everybody kind of panned this free agent class and was like, there's just not a ton of top end talent out there. But to your point, the Mammoth have worked their way to get some really good pieces, one via trade, one via free agency. Is the class as, I guess, bad as it's projected to have been, and is the money commensurate with that? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is one of the worst free agent classes of the last 20 years,
Okay.
to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we saw so many trades over the last week. And I've been told, from multiple sources that, hey, this is a trade league right now. If you want to get better, you got to make some trades. And obviously, they're still decent players. I still think Anders Lee is a great pickup for the Mammoth. But yeah, it was a very poor free agent class. There really was no top end talent that hit the market where you go and you look at it and you think, man, that's a guy that's really going to make this team a lot better. Or man, that's, there really wasn't any sweepstakes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why, we saw so many trades. The Sharks made a lot of trades yesterday.
Sure.
Toronto made a number of trades. Chicago, there's been even more trades today. Like I said before, this is a trade league, currently, and I think that's also why we've seen so many star players on, poor teams, poor rosters ask out and ask to be traded, right? I mean, Brady Tkachuk is now in Florida, and Dylan Larkin's looking for a new home, and there's all that weird nonsense with Zach Werenski, but right now, I think if you're going to get better, it's primarily going to be through the trade market. And, if you can tie up some loose ends with free agents, I think that's really what yesterday was more about was, hey, there's some decent talent, and, we're definitely going to try and approach it that way.
Two of those free agents are goalkeepers. Bobrovsky goes to Toronto, and then Frederick Anderson goes to Edmonton. They're both getting up there in age, especially in the case of Bobrovsky. He's going to be 41, if I recall correctly, when his deal runs out with the Maple Leafs. Do either one of them, I guess more in the case of Edmonton with Frederick Anderson, they've been lacking a goalkeeper. Is that the goalkeeper that can, get Edmonton back to where they want to belong?
No.
Okay.
I mean, there's a reason the guy was pulled,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
In the playoffs. I don't know what it is about the Edmonton Oilers, but the fact that they have fumbled two of the greatest players to ever play the game.
It's true.
Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. The fact that you cannot find a solid goalie to help support that team, because in my opinion, that's all they need. You get a top end goalie, you're probably competing for Stanley Cups again and potentially winning one. And I am shocked that they didn't look at the market and go, you know what, we're going to go all in and we're going to try Bobrovsky. We're going to just see if maybe that's the guy that puts us over the top. Or Connor Hellebuck has been reported in a whole bunch of trade rumors.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Edmonton not trying to bring in a guy like that? He just won a gold medal because he was an impenetrable force, Secretary of Defense that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's baffling to me that, they thought that Tristan Jarry and Connor Ingram were going to be the solutions last year. And then, with that addition yesterday, I just look at it and go, you guys just aren't serious. And, I think it's going to end up costing them, Stanley Cups when they arguably should be competing every single year.
Taking a look across the entire NHL landscape, a lot of moves, and you mentioned it, a lot of free agent pickups, a lot of trades going on. Off the top of your head, which ones stand out to you the most? Which teams got better and which teams didn't? I know we were just talking about the Oilers, but other than that, anything else standing out to you as far as the trades and the moves go inside the National Hockey League?
Yeah, I think you look at a team like Toronto. They shipped out a lot of guys yesterday, and they brought in a number. Obviously, we talked about the goaltender just a few minutes ago. I think that that's a team as well that I think kind of sees the writing on the wall in some regards. They have significantly wasted the prime years of Austin Matthews and William Nylander, and they obviously lost out on Mitch Marner. So I think for them, this is kind of they were lucky enough, they were blessed by the hockey gods to get the first overall pick and bring in a guy like Gavin McKenna. And then they made some, trades that I think moved the needle a little bit. It feels like kind of a last ditch effort to figure things out here. if the season goes poor again, I have a tough time believing that they wouldn't, try and blow things up and try and start over and build around McKenna. But I think they made some good moves that'll make them a little bit more competitive. And then, the San Jose Sharks, it was an interesting day for them yesterday. I thought they started out really strong. They added some interesting older pieces in, Trouba and a couple other guys, but I think it closes the gap for San Jose a little bit. I think that, they were a team that was kind of on the cusp of competing for a wild card spot, and then it fell apart at the end of the year. I think with the additions that they made, the draft that they had, and some of these additions, I think it closes the gap and it puts them right there. And it's going to make, the West even tougher. It's like we talked about earlier in the show. Every single year that goes by, it's more difficult to make the playoffs, especially for younger teams like Utah, like San Jose, like Anaheim. Getting back is difficult, and the Sharks definitely made it a lot more competitive, I think.
Cole, real quick before we head to the break, just real quick, the situation on Barrett Hayton. What's the latest there? I saw last week it was going to arbitration. Now you have the Devils offering a sheet to Barrett Hayton. What's the latest on Barrett's status?
Yeah, so interesting situation for sure. A restricted free agent. The team obviously filed for arbitration, which is different than when a player does. There's certain specifications and limits for both. When a team files for arbitration, it does allow the player to still be offer sheeted. And New Jersey Devils put Utah in a really bit of a pickle, really tough situation. I think they offered Barrett Hayton close to $5 million on a 1-year contract. Most of that was actually in a signing bonus. I think the base salary was only like $850,000, where the signing bonus was like almost $4 million, which I haven't necessarily seen something like that for a while. I think it's tough. Utah re-signed a couple guys this offseason, right? They decided to bring back Carconi, and they brought back Kyle Yamamoto, and they were able to sign those guys each for less than $2 million AAV. Now, they're different players. Barrett Hayton is a different player than both of those guys. He's a center. There's going to be a little bit more value, but in my opinion, close to $5 million for Barrett Hayton, your third or fourth line center, that's quite a bit. I imagine that Utah filed for arbitration because Barrett probably didn't like the initial offer that he was given. And, that was an opportunity to have a third party come in and assess value. But then you've got New Jersey coming in here and offering, probably more money than I would anticipate Utah is willing to give up. So, we'll see what happens. I think they have a week before they have to respond. If Utah decides to let him walk and go to New Jersey, then New Jersey does owe the Mammoth a second-round pick. So you at least get something out of it, which is definitely a positive. But like I said, it just depends on what Utah wants to do. They've bolstered their center depth, obviously, by bringing in a guy like Vincent Trocheck. And so I don't know that you necessarily need Barrett Hayton anymore, especially at that price tag.
Cole Bagley, Utah Mammoth Insider here for KSL Sports. Cole's going to hang out with us for another segment. We still have a lot to talk about, Cole. We got to talk about the prospects. We got to talk about the development camp happening out there. So Cole Bagley will join us coming up next segment as well to talk prospects, to talk to get some of his thoughts from what's going on down there at the Utah Mammoth Ice Center. We'll take a break here on Scotty G and the Coach. It's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Cougars and Aggies. When it comes to sports in Utah, we've got you covered. This is Scotty G and the Coach, Tim LeCaux, presented by Mountain Land Supply on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back into Scotty G and the Coach here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Alex Napoles and Jake Hatch sitting in today. Cole Bagley kind enough to join us for another segment. Cole, we were just talking about, prior to the end of the segment, about some of the prospects and some of the things going on down there at the development camp. What has been your thoughts and your takes of seeing some of these guys like Tejan Gillis, some of these guys like Caleb Denoye, and what they're bringing onto the ice throughout this development camp?
Yeah, it's always fun to kind of see the prospects. I think the most important thing about these development camps is instilling culture. Not only instilling culture, but helping the guys come together, create friendships, create bonds, just to further strengthen the chemistry of the team, right? I mean, a lot of these first round picks are the future of this team. The TJ Ginlas and the Denoyes and the Belches. These are guys that are going to make a huge impact, hopefully, on this Mammoth squad for years to come. And so to have an opportunity to bring him in for a couple of days to get him out on the ice, to get him having fun. I think they went bowling as an activity. A couple of them went to the Bees game last night. They actually hosted a youth clinic, which was really, really cool. They were connecting with, little guys, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds who were, giving them knuckles and, playing games with them. That was really fun and awesome to see. And so I think that's the biggest thing in terms of, skill and what have you. It's a little harder, I think, to judge those types of things in such a short span, especially when, we're only getting to look at these guys for a couple of hours over the course of the week. But, if you wanted to maybe take a couple of things away from this week, I think there's probably two things that have really stood out to me. The first one is how serious TJ Ginla is taking even just this development camp. It feels like he's treating this like training camp. He knows that there's eyeballs on him. He knows that Bill Armstrong's in the building and Coach Torney's in the building and Chris Armstrong and the rest of the coaching staff and front office, and that he's got an opportunity to show them he means business, because this is technically, he's stepping into year 3 in this pipeline, and he wants to start playing at the NHL level. He's seen some of the guys from, other guys from his draft already started making an impact for their squads. He spent a lot of time with some of those players during World Juniors, and he talked about that the other day of, hey, I'm ready. I feel ready. It's my time. A lot of the guys that I grew up playing with who were drafted, during the same year, they're playing. It's my turn to take that next step. And I'd say that based on what I've seen so far, I think he has a really good shot to make the roster, especially if he continues to take it as serious as he has with dev camp. And I'm sure that he's even going to turn it up for rookie camp and then training camp in the next couple of months. The other thing that kind of stood out to me is I think Utah got an absolute steal with their 3rd-round pick in Adam Valentini. This is a guy who was expected to go at the end of the 1st round or early mid-second round at the latest, but he continued to drop because of his size. He's about 5'9", 5'10", but he plays so much bigger than that. He's explosive. He's really good on the puck. He's heavy on the puck. He's quick. He's got good handles, and he's got a nasty, nasty shot. They did a shooting drill on day 1, and he scored 3 goals in a row, all top shelf, 2 bar down. I think he finished like 4 of 8 on that drill scoring wise. And I posted a video of the one on both X and Instagram, and you can kind of hear after he scores, everybody goes, "Ooh!" and that's what it was. I mean, he looks really good. And then I asked him the other day, and we got to talk with him. I said, "Hey, what was the draft experience like for you? I mean, I didn't mean to add salt to the wound, but you probably dropped a little bit further than you were expecting. Do you wear that with pride? Does that, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder?" He's like, "Absolutely. It definitely fuels me, but at the end of the day, it's just a number. And, whether, you're a 1st-round pick or a 2nd or a 3rd or a 4th, everybody's vying for the same thing. We're all just trying to earn a job." And he says, "I will do everything in my power to make it to the National Hockey League." And so I really like what I've seen from him this week. I'm excited to watch him today to kind of see how he plays at a higher intensity, at a higher speed. But I think that, like I said before, I think that the Mammoth did really well this offseason, both from a trade standpoint, a free agency standpoint. I think they did well in the draft with what they were given.
Cole, how do they keep doing this? Like Valentini, do they? I think obviously it goes to good scouting and obviously having a list of guys. But they keep pulling guys out of these middle rounds that apparently appear to be top shelf prospects. There's got to be teams around the NHL saying, "What is Utah doing that we're not doing?"
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of that going on. I mean, I think if you look at Montreal, a guy like Lane Hudson, he was taken a little bit further. He ended up making Montreal's team out of camp.
Yeah.
I mean, so it happens. But like you said, when you get into the later rounds and the later stages, and even in the 1st round, I think that Belchez was a steal at 17.
Sure. Yeah.
He going into the early mock drafts and even some of the mid-season mock drafts, a lot of people had him in the top 10, and then he dropped because he had a clavicle injury that he ensured to us that he's 100%. It's not bothering him anymore. I think some teams looked at it and went, we're not willing to take the risk there. But Utah looked at it and went, really? A 6'5", 230-pound prospect? You're not going to take a risk on him and see if he can't help you out. So yeah, it just, Utah, I think, has one of the best scouting staffs in the National Hockey League, and that's been proven over, not just these recent picks, but look what they did with acquiring guys like Logan Cooley and Dylan Guenther. Logan Cooley should have been 1st overall in his draft class. Dylan Guenther, I think, went 9th overall. He probably should have gone top 3. So, Utah has been really good at assessing talent and making sure that they get the most out of their draft picks. Because, it's not necessarily about, if you get the first overall pick, yeah, you're going to pick a Gavin McKenna or a Macklin Celebrini or a Matthew Schaefer, and you're going to have a great draft. But I think that you have to put perspective into account. You have to look at what a team is given. They had the 17th pick. That didn't guarantee them to get an incredible player by any means, but they did their homework. They traded up and they got, I think, a guy who was a borderline top 10 pick, who I think is going to have a pretty good impact on this club.
What is it about Ethan Belch that made him slide so far? You mentioned top 10 pick, and I think some of the mocks that I saw had him in top 11, but ends up falling to the Utah Mammoth at 17, which, again, perfect for the Utah Mammoth. They got the guy that they ultimately wanted, but what made him slide so down far for the Utah Mammoth?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, clavicle injury. He sustained that last year, and it took him out for the remainder of the season. Then he didn't play in the playoffs. And I think for a lot of scouts, they want to see how these guys do when games really matter. It's not just about the regular season. It's about winning, especially guys in the first round. If you're going to take a guy in the first round, he better know how to win. He better have a killer mentality. He better, be relentless and show you that he knows what he's doing. And I think for Utah, they looked at it and went, this is pick 17. This isn't pick 9. This isn't pick 8. We're willing to take the risk. We're willing to take that. And I don't even think there's that much risk involved. Yeah, he had an injury, but he's, if you've looked at, his body of work since then, he said he's 100%, he's lifting weights, and I saw him out at camp this week. He looked great. I really don't think that there's much to worry about there. So yeah, there's always going to be reasons that the guys get looked over. And I think for Utah, it was definitely worth taking a risk, if you want to use that, to pick up a guy like Belch's.
Okay, Cole, we had Greg Wyshynski on with DJ and PK this morning to talk about the moves the Mammoth made. Did you see the whole thing about, to go back to the Barrett Hayton conversation real quick, did you see the whole thing about the way that the money on this is like a bit of a
666?
Yes, they built it into the deal.
I love when teams do things.
I don't think Alex knows about
brand.
this. Yeah.
No, I don't.
So Sonny Mehta is their GM in New Jersey, and he's apparently a former pro poker player. And the compensation package for a second-round pick, which essentially is the commensurate deal that they've got with the Barrett Hayton deal, well, it's up to $4,775,667. They went right to the limit with a $666 difference. Essentially, and as Greg Wyshynski points out, it's a bit of just a shot across the bow from the Devils towards Utah in a way. And PK, obviously being from New Jersey in his own right, he's like, well, is it meaning something? He's like, yeah, it was them essentially telling Utah, hey, we know what you did, because there was reportedly they were somewhat close to a deal during the draft for all this, and it was their way of sticking a little bit to Utah.
Yep. And honestly, I kind of like it.
It's kind of funny, yeah.
It's on brand. I think that's great. And yeah, New Jersey did Utah pretty dirty here.
It's a poison pill contract. This goes back.
It really is.
It's like, because remember the Utah Jazz, remember the Paul Millsap deal, then the guard Wes Matthews, where these teams poisoned it, where you just simply can't do it. It feels like the Mammoth, they can't match this without it's a poison pill deal.
It is. It's like we talked about before. In my opinion, it's too steep for him.
Yeah.
Just based on his production, I think he only had 25 points this year.
Yeah.
He's had some injury problems, not just this year, but in the past. This is a guy that was drafted almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now he's just coming up on his RFA because he's had injury problems that have kept him up in the press box for quite a while. And he's a former 5th overall pick, and he just never really turned out. This is a guy that was picked above Quinn Hughes, which that's tough. It's tough to have a guy like that just not really perform up to the level that you hope for. But I do think it's funny. It feels like the National Hockey League, there's a little bit more comedy than other leagues. It feels like teams like to chirp each other a little bit more, and I'm all here for it.
That one was, I just thought that was very on brand, but at the same time, it's like yeah, we're gonna stick it to you a bit. I respect it in so many different ways.
Yeah, I do too.
Cole, when you look at all the moves that the Utah Mammoth have made this offseason, how much of those moves are made with with players like Simashev in mind, with players like Tijik in mind, with potentially opening up some roster spots to get these guys going onto the NHL ice next season.
Yeah, the biggest thing for Utah right now is they're in this in-between phase. They've emerged from the early parts of the rebuild where it's all about, immediate player development, where it's all about, getting guys like Gunther and Cooley and, Josh Stone when he was on the squad, those types of players, ice time, and just, letting the chips fall where they are and not really caring about record, right? I mean, through the first 3 seasons of the rebuild, wins and losses are not important. It's more about, gathering picks, hitting on those picks, and getting those guys ice time as quickly as possible. They did that. That has been a success. Then they stepped into the next part of the phase of, okay, now it's time to start winning some games. Now it's time to start playing, competitive hockey, meaningful hockey. Check that one off the box. Then on to the next step, making the Stanley Cup playoffs. Check. Now you're into this phase of, okay, we're a playoff team, but we're still buying time for these prospects. So how do we do that appropriately? How do we make space for them, give them time, but make sure that they're ready to play for us? They don't want to just bring guys on to bring guys on. And what head coach Andre Tourny told us last week is, if a prospect's going to make this team, it's because he can make this team and make this team better. He can help this team. And I do think that that's why they have opened up a couple of spots, and there are going to be some opportunities for Tijik Inlet and Daniil Boot and Dmitry Simashev to make this team out of camp and to help them out. Definitely defensively, that third pairing, there's a lot of question marks about who's going to be, rounding out the blue line for the Mammoth on that third pair, because Cole's gone and Durzee's gone. So who's it going to be? Is it going to be DeSimone and Simashev? Is it going to be Simashev and Lamoureux? I think that's why they're excited for training camp. And then up front, Bill talked about trading Peterka because things didn't work out and they wanted to open up some additional space, for a guy, for their prospects to come in and take spots and play. And if you look at the roster, especially if Hayton isn't matched, there's probably 2 spots to be won by some prospects. Is Boot fully ready to make this team out of training camp? Is Tijik Inlet ready to make this team out of training camp? I think that's what makes this so exciting. And, Utah's going to have to, be careful with it, right? Because there's no more taking steps back. It's all forward from here. You've made the playoffs. Now the goal is to not only make the playoffs again, but to be even more competitive and potentially win a series. And I think, the year after that, it's okay, going beyond that, maybe winning a second series and so on and so forth. So, yeah, for Utah, they understand where they are, and I think they're going about it the right way.
You can go over to KSLSports.com. You can check out all the write-ups from our Utah Mammoth insider, Cole Bagley. Cole does such a fantastic job at giving you all the information when it comes to the Utah Mammoth. Cole, thanks for taking some time today to join us, man, and break down all this. A lot of really good information, a lot of really good stuff, it feels like, happening with the Utah Mammoth this offseason so far. So, Cole, we appreciate your time today, man.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.
There he is, Cole Bagley, Utah Mammoth insider for KSLSports.com. Jake Hatch, a lot of really great stuff there from Cole Bagley. And I think, just looking at everything that the Utah Mammoth is doing this offseason, it should continue to get fans excited for what's to come for this team. I like that they are not afraid to go out and make a trade for a guy like Trocheck. I like that they're not afraid to go out and get some help through free agency and say, look, we were this close to a team, a Vegas team who ended up making it to the Stanley Cup Finals, and instead turning around and saying, what can we do to get better? What can we do to bring in experience? And so far they've done that.
Yeah, I think it just goes the whole MO of how Bill Armstrong and Chris Armstrong and kind of the brain trust of this franchise. They're not afraid to take swings. And we all know that the Central Division that they are in, it's stacked, especially at the top. And you've got to find some way to climb up there. And Guess what? You don't do that by just sitting on your hands. So
Absolutely.
I respect it.
A lot of great moves happening in the NHL. A lot of things happening too when it comes to free agency and trades. We'll be keeping an eye on everything that happens around the National Hockey League, specifically teams within the division of the Utah Mammoth, to see who's going to get better, who's potentially going to get worse. Where can the Mammoth find some extra points? Where can they find some extra ways to move up? And it's fun to watch.
Okay, coming up next, want to talk some recruiting?
Recruiting?
Got some news.
Okay.
Two announcements for local prospects. Very interesting dynamic with both of them.
There you go. We'll jump into that next. Let's jump into some recruitment talk here coming up on Scotty G and the Coach. We'll take a break coming up next here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
You're locked on to Scotty G and the Coach, Tim LaCombe.
Now I know y'all are tripping.
Presented by Mountain Land Supply on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back into Scotty G and the Coach here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Alex Napoles, Jake Hatch filling in for Scotty and the Coach. We're going to jump into some recruiting talk here, Jake Hatch, because I think that there has been a couple of some in-state names on the move. One of them committing here locally, one of them committing not so locally. But before we get into that too, how awesome has it been to see both Utah and BYU on the recruiting trail here for the local prospects, right? The local people inside the state of Utah, and being able to get some big commitments for some big names here in the state. Yeah,
well, Morgan Scally in particular, but Utah, he has made like this whole renewed emphasis on hometown prospects, and Utah's cleaned up a lot of guys in this recruiting class. Now, that has caused some angst down in Provo amongst Cougar fans because they have been watching Utah scooping up the likes of Ian Aloisio, and they also added Fui Vakapuna, local names that people are familiar with. Well, BYU finally got on the board with one of the top prospects here locally. He's actually the number 2 rated prospect, according to 24/7 Sports, in this recruiting class. Uhila Wolfgram out of Maple Mountain High School. BYU went head-to-head with Oklahoma in this one and won that battle. Now, BYU and OU have been going back and forth on a bunch of this stuff. They won the Crew Jones battle earlier this offseason. He, obviously formerly of Ridgeline High School, if I recall, now at Orem. He's the number 3 prospect in the state. OU won that battle. Bodie Sparrow, top guy in the state, absolutely incredible athlete. It was down to BYU and Oklahoma, according to most people. Well, he picks Oklahoma. Had Oklahoma won the Wolfgram sweepstakes, they would have had the top 3 prospects in state they would have committed. BYU wins that one. So it's a nice win for BYU to get a true bona fide 4-star in Uhila Wolfgram. But to your point, both BYU and Utah have done a very, very good job about prioritizing hometown prospects, and that's always going to be the backbone of these two programs. Now, the other story I wanted to talk about that I kind of teased, 2 different dynamics here. So Uhila Wolfgram, celebrate Cougar fans because that's obviously a nice recruiting win. The other one that's an interesting dynamic here is another hometown prospect in Manasseh Ermoa Brown.
Right.
He is he played defensive line last year at Corner Canyon High School. He had moved to offensive tackle, and he is a fringe, almost 4-star prospect in his own right. He's a high 3-star according to 24/7 in their composite rating. Well, it has long been thought that it was a battle between BYU and Arizona State, that he was a Big 12 battle. Either the Sun Devils or the Cougars are going to win this battle.
And this is a guy who had the looks of Oregon,
Oh, yeah.
UCLA, Cal, amongst others.
Yeah. Like, we're talking yet another one of those top prospects. He's in the top 10 in the state. I think he might have been like the 4th or 5th rated prospect in the state. Well, and by the way, the Uhila Wolfgram and the Moa Brown announcements have both come within the last hour. So this is literally just happening. Well, Moa Brown all of a sudden announces he's going to, wait for it, drum roll please, Fresno State.
Oh, what?
And I was like, excuse me.
Of all the schools and of all the looks that you had, Fresno State. Which, okay, this is what's interesting to me, and I think this is in part potentially due to where college athletics is today.
Sure.
Right, with the NIL, with the transfer portal, because in theory, right, some of these guys and some of these players, right, as you're recruiting the high school talents and you're looking to bring in people from the prep ranks, playing time can be huge.
It can.
Playing time can be, you can say, hey, look, in the case of Fresno State, say, hey, look, maybe we're not the biggest school, maybe we don't have the most resources, but what we can guarantee you and what we can offer you is guaranteed playing time. And as much as college football has changed, as much as NIL and the transfer portal has changed things, one of the good things and one of the good positives that has come out of all this is the fact that somebody like Manasseh Brown can commit to a Fresno State, can go in and just absolutely shred it, can go absolutely have a phenomenal season, fantastic season, and then in a year or so potentially look to move on to a Power 4 or a bigger program.
Yeah, I completely concur with your assessment there because, and by the way, if you are a G6 program, that's kind of got to be your message. You got to be telling
Absolutely.
these guys,
Oh,
hey,
1,000%.
come here and play, come here and shine. And by the way, when that bag comes from an inevitable Power 4 program that wants to pay you, we understand it. We get it.
I think it's unfortunate that there are schools like that who can't hold on to the talent and can't hold on to some of these players. But in turn, it is a really great thing for high school prospects because there are programs, out there who just prioritize the transfer portal, just prioritize going after experienced guys, experienced players who can come in and make a difference. Whereas now the G6 can focus on some of these really high talented prospects and say, hey, look, we can give you this, this, and this, and then from there move on and make the next jump in your career. Yeah.
So the Moa Brown one, like I said, it had been thought that it was ASU or BYU for him. He was going to stick around in the Big 12. But to your point, he may be looking at it on its head saying, you know what, I want to go somewhere I can play. I can play right away. And yeah, if that bag comes down the line, I'll take it. And by the way, I'm not under the illusion that Fresno State's not taking care of him at some point financially, because them jumping up to the Pac-12, the new Pac-12, which by the way launched yesterday. Congratulations to Utah State.
Absolutely.
And the other new members of that league. They got to have some money to be able to throw around in their own right. Just it's part of the deal. And I just saw this. I literally crossed my timeline. Yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of NIL becoming legalized by the NCAA.
Really?
So kind of funny that.
How much have things changed in 5 years?
A lot. We're now paying guys millions of dollars to play college football. Hey.
Absolutely.
But interesting dynamic. Big win for BYU to get Ohila Wolfgram. And by the way, to beat out Oklahoma. That the Sooners have been very intentional about coming to the state, and they want to bring the top talent out of the state, much like a lot of programs from the old Pac-12. Oklahoma's now in the SEC. They know that the state of Utah has got a lot of good high school talent, especially the cream of the crop, and they essentially said, we're gonna scoop that off. BYU gets a big win keeping Ohila Wolfgram here.
Absolutely.
But the Moa Brown one, I'm a bit floored because I'm just like, okay, but to your point, if he's got a chance to go play, good on him.
I'm sure that was probably a big drawing point. But not of course, there's the money factor to it.
Yeah, but
again, I think for G6 schools to be able to, they should be able to use that and absolutely should use that to their advantage and say, hey, look, we might not have the biggest resources, we might not have the best facilities, we might not be this, and this, but if we can give you the opportunity to showcase your skills and showcase your talent and have immediate playing time, that draws high school players, especially, again, in an era where people prioritize the transfer portal and players who have already done it at that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll be rooting for these kids. It's one of my favorite things about covering high school sports, and you covered as well as I do, is watching these guys live their dreams. And by the way, the end goal still to this day for these guys is to make it to the NFL. And the way you do that, you go and play.
This is just another pathway to do that.
Yes.
This is just another pathway to get to that ultimate goal, which is to make it to the National Football League. Very, very excited for high school football to start up, by the way. Very, very excited for football in general to start up again. We are so close.
We are coming very close. Just real quick before we go. So looking at the top prospects in state, top 10, it's a nice round number. If you're keeping track at home, as it stands, Oklahoma has 2 of the top 10. I mentioned Bodie Sparrow and Crew Jones. BYU has 1 in Ohila Wolfgram. Michigan has 2. Kyle Whittingham taking Camden Lopati and Christian Hanshaw. Utah has 3. They have Ian Aloisio, Fui Vakapuna, and Monson Tukuafu.
And that should be incredibly exciting for Utah fans.
Absolutely. But then you have the random Manasseh Brown and Fresno State. But that shows you the diversification of this talent. It's being dispersed far and wider than ever has before. And it's good for these young men. They get their opportunity to play. But I am a bit of a homer for this state. I'd love to see more of these guys stay in
Absolutely.
State.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The more of these guys you can give them the chance to be the quote unquote hometown heroes and the opportunities that they can get with the local universities, and be able to see these guys and keep a close eye on their careers and their trajectory, right? Because we see them all the way from the high school level, and move up, and I think that's awesome for them to be able to stay here.
I know we got to go, but dispersal of the talent, by the way. Colorado, Oregon State, Iowa State, West Virginia, Nebraska, Oregon, Penn State. The guys are going all over the country from the Beehive State. It's cool.
And that's great.
But I want more of them to play here.
That's a testament too. Absolutely. That's a testament too, though, to how much the football level here in the state of Utah has jumped dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
All right, we got to take a break. Coming up next, Andy Bailey will join us. We'll talk NBA. We'll talk Walker Kessler. We'll talk NBA free agency and everything in between. That's coming up next here on Scotty G and the Coach. It's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.